Alright, so today's lesson is going to be extremely similar to yesterday's lesson. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time walking you through the foldable like I did yesterday because it's pretty much the same foldable, but now with the cosine function. So as you can see here, I've just got my notes from yesterday and it's pretty much the same thing. The even the front of the foldable, I'm stuttering here, but even the front of the foldable, same thing. So go ahead and just grab your highlighter and you're going to do the exact same thing that you did yesterday. The number in front of your function, whether it be sine or cosine, is always going to be the amplitude. And the number in front of your angle measure, here we're calling it x instead of theta, but the number in front of your angle measure is always going to affect the period. And then in the second half of the foldable, whatever number you're subtracting in your angle measure is always going to affect your horizontal shift. So same concepts, we're just really driving it home by practicing it again with cosine. So inside your foldable, again, the same steps. You're going to, 1, identify your amplitude. So if I give you a general equation, like y equals a cosine of bx, then your amplitude is going to be a. Your period is going to be your original period divided by b. Once you identify those two things, then you can find your x values starting at 0. And then find the corresponding y's. And I totally skipped 2 in my numbering. 1, 2, 3, 4, you're going to graph it. So same as yesterday, just now you have to keep in mind when you're computing in step 3 that you're working with cosine instead of sine. And so our graph will look a little different than yesterday's foldable. So this is the sine curve, but cosine always begins at 1 for the y value, and then it dips down. So whatever your amplitude is, that's where it's going to begin. So we're going to call this x sub 1, x sub 2, x sub 3, x sub 4, and x sub 5. Because remember, we divide our period into 4 equal sections, and then we're going to plot these 5 points and kind of look at how the curve appears from that. So your curve isn't actually going to change a whole lot except for the width of it and the height of it. So it'll still look like a cosine curve. Still kind of look like that. It's kind of ugly, but you get the point. And notice the amplitude is still the distance from the center to the height, and the period is still the distance from start to finish before it repeats itself. And here it's 2 pi over b. So let's go ahead and just highlight these things once again. So if you're looking at this foldable, you can still get all the visual information that we got before. Highlight my b, coefficient on x, and that's going to affect my period here. All right, now let's go down to the bottom, and you'll remember from yesterday that the bottom section of our foldable helped us deal with horizontal shift, so actually shifting the whole graph over a little bit. So we're going to write those steps down, and let's go ahead and do that over here. So the general equation we're starting with is y equals a cosine of bx, but this time we have minus c. Over here, we're going to still identify our amplitude, which is a. We're still going to calculate our new period, which is 2 pi divided by b. But this time, we have to add the horizontal shift, which is not just whatever number c is. It's always c divided by b. So b not only affects your period, but it also affects your horizontal shift. Once you've found those three things, then you can find your x values. And this time you start, this is so important, you start with c over b. If you don't start there, your whole problem is going to be messed up. And a lot of people last year, like I said yesterday, they would mess that up and then they'd have to redo their whole problem. Our third step is to find all the corresponding y values. And our fourth step is to graph it. So a lot of identifying and then some calculating here and then plotting points. So if we want to look at how our general graph is going to appear, it's going to look exactly like this but shifted over some. So instead of our x sub 1 being at the origin, it's shifted over slightly, and therefore all of our others are also shifted over slightly. So here's my amplitude in the opposite direction. And my cosine curve starts up at A, and it's going to wiggle down here and then come back up. And you can see the amplitudes from the center to that A, and then also our period is still 2 pi divided by b. So the only change here is our starting point, which shifts the whole graph over a little bit. So now I'm going to highlight one more time. A is amplitude. B affects our period. And it also affects our starting point, which is where C comes in as well. And notice that C always lies. So it says minus C, but you just pick out the number that comes after the minus sign, and that's going to tell us where to start. All right, now go ahead and glue that in on the right hand side, and we'll do an example.